right, all right. Thank you, thank you. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for coming to this program. My name is Todd Goodwin. I am a teacher. I taught for 47 years at a K-8 school, and I still teach one class a week at a community college, U.S. history, to college students. And so I always said to my students, you can call me Mr. Goodwin, you can call me Mr. G, you can call me Todd, please. Full disclosure, I'm a senior citizen now too. As my wife says, you don't look that old. That's what she says, right. And so please call me Todd. Just don't call me late for dinner. I promised there'd be some bad jokes, so that's the first one. Thank you. So the name of this program is called Good 41, Stories from the Studebaker and Other Cars We've Loved. And I started as a professional storyteller going on the road in the summers or on weekends, and I used to do mostly children's programs. I still do children's programs, so if any of you know any children needing a program, I'm the one. And but then 19 years ago, when my dad passed, we found this in his stuff. And you can see it's a 66 mash plate, because remember in the old days, sometimes you get a new plate every year, or at the most every other year. But now, of course, you've got a plate for eons, and you put a sticker on every year, and the thing rusts out. Oh, yep, come on.
I got someone coming. I'm just wondering the best way to let her in.
Oh, all right.
Do you want to sneak by, or would you like to go over that way? You could sneak by this way.
Great. So when we were cleaning after my dad passed, full disclosure, I have 3 knucklehead brothers too. So, and praise the Lord, knock on wood, we are still around, still doing well, still having adventures in cars. And so one of my older brothers said, "Oh, Todd, you should take this," because we were separating out my dad's stuff, because you could make a story with it. And so I did sit down with it, and I've made a set of stories that I hope you'll enjoy. So this is the actual Studebaker actual license plate that my dad put on his 1941 Studebaker. And he called it a Good 41 because our name is Goodwin, and we had a shoe store in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, where I'm from. Any other Fitchburg folks here?
My brother.
All right, good for him. All right. So after a while, when my dad would drive around with his Studebaker, people would say, "Oh, that's Mr. Goodwin's 41 Studebaker." And so my brothers and I, like to tell stories about it. And then it gave me my internet web domain name, good41.com. So I would appreciate it if you can visit there to see the other programs I do. So as I say, this was the inspiration for this program. And I also like to think, because now that I've been doing this program at a lot of senior centers, I always get people sharing their first car stories, or their funny car stories, or sometimes a jalopy story. So later in the program, there's going to be a moment if you would like to share, a little bit of your story. Okay, so be ready. So I always also like to think of road trips. Oh, come on in. Yep, plenty of room. Yep. The road trips that we took as kids. So you always have to have a song for the road trip. So I'm going to sing it. Once you get it, you'll pick it right up, sing along. Now, if you sang it in your road trips, good for you. It's just this very simple song. As we were driving up to my grandmother's in central New Hampshire, my dad, my mom, and 4 boys in a station wagon. How many people had a station wagon at some point? Well, they were the big, the real important family car 50 years ago. So here's the song, just as we were coming up the top of the hill to go down to my grandmother's house. We're here because we're here because we're here because we're here. We're here because we're here because we are here because we're here. Oh, give yourselves a big round of applause. You did a nice job there. All right. So when I was starting to do this program, and I again, because I do campfire programs for children and adults and families, and I always put some harmonica music in, some songs with the stories. So I brought up that song, and my brother said, "Oh yeah, remember the Pontiac?" And this is the car that I remember first. And in a minute, I'm going to pass around a number of these cards. And again, if somebody at the back can just put them in a pile, and I'll get them at the end of the program. So it's an early 50s Pontiac. And again, my brother found this in my dad's slides. Remember how people used to shoot the little slides? And my dad had boxes of them.
53 maybe?
That's what I'm wondering. I put early 50s, 50 or 51. So I'm always looking for help. Pontiac wagon. And this is the wagon that I first remember in the dim mists of my mind. Okay. And we would go on these road trips. And the most funny story I can think of this car is one time we had spent the whole Sunday afternoon at my grandmother's house. We had had dinner with her, supper. We got my mom put us into our PJs for the ride home because you know how little boys or little kids fall asleep. So I'll pass that around. So in the back of the Pontiac, I'm riding, and we're just like 2 miles away from my grandmother's house. And my brother all of a sudden just went, "Todd, I'm not feeling so good." All over me. Oh, sorry. And so my mom went, "Oh," and my dad went, "Oh." So we had to turn around, go back, and everybody got my brother out. Everybody's worried about him, and there I'm sitting in a mess. And finally, they took attention to me, and I can't remember what happened. I think I got washed up. They must have rustled up some extra clothes or something, or maybe we put us back in our clothes. But then we all fell asleep on my grandmother's couch. My brother got to sleep on her bed. Then we were put back in the car. By then my dad had cleaned up and we went home. So that's my favorite story about a Pontiac wagon. I don't mean to offend any Pontiac owners. But one of the other things I find interesting in doing this is think of all the cars that we grew up with that are only, don't exist anymore. They don't make them anymore. Like Pontiacs, they don't make. All right.
And they threw you in the back of that Pontiac, right? All four of you. Like loose cannons.
Oh,
car seats.
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thrown in.
Everybody did, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't report us. Yeah, because don't report us. Right. So here is the Studebaker. And actually, I'll pass around a couple. Yep. Because these are two exactly the same. So, okay.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Oh.
So here is the Studebaker. That's the star of this story, if you will. Yep. And it's in 1941. Business coupe. Now, when we were growing up, my dad would always call it a businessman's coupe. But I went on the Studebaker website and saw that they just called it a business coupe. But of course, in 1941, most business coupes were probably driven by businessmen. So I don't mean any offense to anybody if I let it slip, businessmen. But you can see it's a beautiful, my dad called it pea soup green. And inside was a tan mohair kind of fabric, and on the sides of the door. Of course, by the time he got this car in the early 60s, and I'll tell you that story in a minute, the fabric was very faded. But he loved this car because A, he was able to get it for a real deal from the estate of a woman that when he was in high school, he used to drive for her during the war, back in the 40s. Okay? So he had always liked this car because it was a Studebaker. And remember, and I know how many people have heard of Studebakers before. Some of you guys are, I guess, just old enough, right? Yeah.
I have 37.
Oh, there you go. All right. So, but Studebakers were very well-made cars. They weren't as expensive as like a Packard or a Cadillac, but they were a very good car. So my dad loved this car because he would, when he was, just after he got his license, he would drive this lady or do her errands for her in this car. So when he was able to get it, I think in 63 or 4, the date on those photos. So he loved it. And you can see it's just got a long front end. It was a 6-cylinder, a door on either side, and a little bit in the back. But it only had one bench seat behind the front seat that could hold certainly 2 big adults. And remember, my dad had 4 little boys. So we're going to get to that thing about no car seats, don't worry. But when we were little boys, at the beginning of the 60s, he could sometimes take us for a ride and squeeze all 4 of us up front. And my mom would stay at home. But of course, my dad ran a shoe store, so I think my mom was perfectly happy on Sunday afternoons particularly to get Bill and the boys out of the house. So you have, behind the front seat, you have a little shelf to put your briefcase on because you're a business person. And hanging from that shelf was a leatherette curtain that split in the middle. And then, of course, you can see the rear end, and it had a big lift trunk lid. And in the trunk, going from behind the front seat through that leatherette curtain to the end of the car, was a giant cavern of space. I mean, that's where, talk about child seats, that's where, as we got bigger, and you can see that the Goodwin boys are not little boys anymore, my dad started putting us in there, in the trunk. 2 at a time, so that you wouldn't be lonely. But then it got kind of big. It was hard for, when we got big, to be my dad and 2 boys. It would be my dad, 1 boy, and 3 boys in the back, under the trunk. And it was kind of cool to ride in there. And eventually, he got a mattress to put in there, so it was a little better on our knees and our backs. And of course, it was fine for a long trip because you could just take a snooze. Now, of course, there was no light in there, except you could look out the back, and right at each corner was the red lens of the brake light. Okay, and there was nothing else around it, and there was just a little bulb. And so as we're driving along, you could look out through the red lens and say, oh, we're going up Main Street, or we're going down this street. And just as my dad would step on the brake to start slowing down, the light would give you a split-second flash before the brakes engaged. So you had a moment to reach up and grab something so you wouldn't go flying. So we didn't need car seats. Don't report me. I mean, don't report my dad. He's a good man. Good man. And so we loved going in. And then sometimes as we got a little bit older, my dad would let us each bring a buddy. So sometimes it'd be my dad, 1 or 2 boys up front, and then 3 or 4 or 5 boys in the trunk. And so we'd get somewhere, and then rather than go up through the curtain, because that was a pain in the neck, my dad would open the trunk, and out would come this crop of boys. And then the other thing that we loved was, and I love this picture, because here's my dad driving the Studebaker during a July 4th parade going in front of our shoe store in Fitchburg. So please feel free to pass that around as well. All right. So I think, yeah. Actually, I've got an extra one of this. We love this car because my dad loved it so much. And again, in mid-60s Fitchburg, there weren't a lot of Studebakers driving around. Does everybody follow that? Because remember that Studebaker went out, Studebaker merged with Packard in the 1950s, and then Studebaker stopped making all their models by the early 60s. And some of you have already mentioned the Avante, which was like the last production Studebaker, which you can still buy a lot of parts for. They made the Avante up until the small companies made the Avante. It wasn't the Studebaker Corporation. Yeah.
The Avante is a separate company, still available.
Right, that's what I'm saying. You can still buy one, but it doesn't feel quite the same. But of course, in mid-60s Fitchburg, there weren't a lot of Studebakers. There weren't hardly any Avantis because it was a very sportsy car, for the time. Yeah. So here's again not one of my dad, but in the side pictures you can't see the license plate, but here it is, and I can't remember what year this is. Nope. But you can see he's got the Good 41 license plate on that car. And as I said, he owned that car for close to 35 years, and he had that license plate for close to 36 or 7 or 8 or 9 years.
Wow.
Okay? And I always loved this car because one time my sons and I, we went to a fair, and it was near our house, so my sons and I could walk there. And sometimes we'd bump into my dad and my stepmom at the fair or around town, and usually my dad had the Studebaker out from like April to the end of October. Everybody follow that? But once any snow, if it was still a snowy spring, he'd keep it in the garage. He would put it away in the garage so it never saw snow because he was worried about it. But he wanted to keep that Good 41 license plate because if he turned it in, he might not be able to get it back. And it was his trademark around town, Good 41. So in 1985 or 86, my 2 sons were going to a fair, and I could see, my dad, he was a member of the Rotary Club, so he helped at the fundraisers, and parked over on the side, and he always tried to park over on the side so it wouldn't be too close to any people who don't appreciate a fine car. So these are my 2 little boys sometime in 1985 or 6 beside Grandpa's car, and they did get a ride or 2 in Grandpa's car. But of course, by then, the mid 80s, you were supposed to have the kids in car seats. There was no seat belts in this car. There was no radio in this car. There's going to be a part of the story later. Though there was a little place in the front with a grill for a radio speaker and a beautiful piece of metal that had the stylized S on it that you could pull out and put a radio in if you ordered one. Because remember in those days, anybody else remember? You had to pay extra for a radio. Yeah.
Call that knockout plate.
That's right. Thank you. Oh, good. I'll use it. All right, a knockout plate. So that car never had a radio, but that was not a problem because we like to sing. As I mentioned, you heard me sing already. And so, my three brothers and I, we sang in our local church choir, and we really enjoyed it. And as well as the fact that my mother wasn't going to let us get out of it because she had sung in the same choir as a kid, and we also got paid, $2 a month. That was good money in those days. Yeah, but that's another whole set of stories of being a kid. But so we all loved going with my dad in the Studebaker. So it didn't have a radio, didn't have seatbelts. Oh, it had another beautiful feature that you don't see a lot today. My dad would say, "Remember, when you shut the door, shut it gently and then push." The Studebaker, you don't have to slam it. On that model, and I'm assuming on some of their other models, they had a thing you just click, click. You didn't have to slam the door. And then the other thing is, again, my dad owned this car for over 35 years, from when we were little boys until we were guys in our late 30s, early 40s. We all learned to drive standard on it. And he was a little worried about it first. And it was a 3 on the tree. Remember that old expression? Here's a steering wheel, and then 1, 2, 3. And it had a beautiful, creamy, tan handle, and the wheel was a dark brown. And again, the horn button in the center was Studebaker. I still remember that, and it was that stylized S. It was just so smooth. It was beautiful. And to get the gas, you had two keys for the car, one for the engine and one for the trunk, and you had an additional key for the gas cap. That was, again, something that Studebaker had put on. Now, I don't know if it was just that year or that model, but I know they had it. But one of the best features about the Studebaker was what's called hill hold. Because, again, most cars in those days, back in the 40s and 50s, were what I grew up calling, standard transmission, right? How many people learned on a standard? Right. How many people remember your parents having a standard transmission? Because, again, when automatic transmission did develop, many companies wanted to offer it. But again, like a radio, you had to pay a lot extra for that, right? Okay.
Subaru came out with the hill holder in the 60s.
Okay.
Boeing company that had that.
I did not know that, right? Because how many people, when they were driving their standard shift car, and you came up to a light on a little hill, and all of a sudden you start to sweat, right? Because can you do the shift? You have to learn that skill. Now, again, I enjoy driving cars with standard shift now, and I had one about 10 years ago, a little Chevy Cavalier, with a standard shift. But I remember when I was learning to drive, oh my gosh, am I going to burn the clutch? Am I going to roll back and do all that panic? But Studebaker came up with this thing called hill hold, which when you stepped on the brake and let off the clutch, it would sense that you were coming to a stop. And particularly, I was because near where I lived was a little red light with just a small rise. But the Studebaker would hold you on the hill for the 2 seconds that it takes to do that.
Oh, it was a ball bearing that rolled and cut and held the hydraulic line closed.
Thank you. All I knew it was a godsend for me and my brothers as we were learning. Because my dad was, on one hand, he wanted his boys to learn to drive a standard. On the other hand, it was his prized possession, his Studebaker. So the good news is, a little bit later, my brother bought a late 60s Chevy pickup truck with manual transmission. So my dad would pay he'd say, take your brother out driving. So my brother helped teach us, and his clutch got burned out more. But of course, it didn't have hill hold. It was a Chevy. Yeah, right. So, but the other thing about the Studebaker is, my dad was so proud because he would be in all the parades in town. And I was good advertising because everybody knew Mr. Goodwin, because the shoe store had been in our family for like over 80 years. But then my brother got his license, and it was in the fall, and my brother said to my dad, we went to high school youth group at that time, and my brother said to my dad, can I go to the youth group tonight with the Studebaker, because I've got a girlfriend I want to impress. So my dad thought, because my brother was a good driver, and well, except for one time, I'll tell you later. But it didn't involve the Studebaker. And my dad said, sure, you can take it. Again, park away from everybody else. And again, no speeding with it. Of course, the Studebaker was a 6-cylinder, and my dad never sped with it, so we never sped with it because we were always afraid we'll break something if you go too fast. And we didn't go on highways much. We used to take the back roads, but it would always go. It was dependable. So my dad said, yes, you can take the Studebaker to youth group as long as you take your brother. And I go, oh, great, because it'll be cool to drive around. And so we get in the car, and we drive to Patsy's house. That was her name. And he pulls up into her driveway and gets out and he says, oh, Todd, do you mind getting in the trunk? Because, I don't want it to make three people in the trunk. It'd be kind of tight with me and my girlfriend. I said, no matter, because I've been riding in the trunk all my life, So I get in the trunk, and I get in there, and I hear them walking down the driveway, and then I hear Patsy's voice, a woman's voice, a girl's voice. I knew who she was because she went to the high school with us. They met in a high school musical. How romantic, huh? Anyway, she said, oh, you've got your father's antique car. And my brother goes, yeah, I drive it all the time. That was it. So he opens the door for her and he says, you don't have to slam the door. And you could hear him do the click, click, the double click. And he gets in, starts it up, backs out of the driveway, and he starts heading down. And he says, would you like to listen to some music? Because remember, they had been in musicals together. So she goes, oh, I'd love to listen to some music. Now remember, this Studebaker did not have a radio. It just had the knockout plate ready to put one in if you wanted to. So somehow my brother made a clicking sound with some button or something. So that gave me the clue. I'm going to sing. So he clicked it and I started singing. Oh, when the saints go marching in. And then Patsy said, oh, that's too loud. Turn it down. Actually, change the station. Okay. So I had to come up with another one. So all I could think of was, they like Broadway musicals. Some enchanted evening, you may see a stranger. And then she goes, oh, that's not one of my favorites. So change the station. So my brother clicks it one more time. All I could think of was something we were singing in church. Onward, Christian soldiers. And she goes to my brother. Because again, I'm here at the crack of the curtain, so I can hear everything they're saying. And she goes to my brother. That's a strange radio station. All you're getting is the same singer. And boy, is he weird. And so my brother started laughing because he couldn't. So I poke my head through the curtain and I say, hello. And she goes, wah! And he introduced me to her, but don't worry, it didn't do any permanent damage. They've been married for 30-something years. So
Funny stuff.
and it's true. People because sometimes, I must admit, full disclosure, as a storyteller, you sometimes embellish stories, but that one is true.
Yeah, I like that.
All right.
That's different.
Yeah.
Very different.
So like I say, my dad had that car for somewhere between the early 60s to the mid to late 90s. And he kept that license plate as well. And like I say, every winter he would take it off and put it onto another car that we would call beater cars. Have you ever heard that expression? Where, because in the late 60s, my parents got separated and then divorced. So my mom took the family car, and I'll show you that in a minute. So my dad always had the Studebaker, but again, went away for the winter. So he would have that license plate, good 41, on a procession of tired cars. And I always want to go back and see if the registry has, like, in ancient files. I would just love to get the complete list of cars. That would be so much fun. But just before my dad got the Studebaker, and after they had the Pontiac wagon dying them, they bought a microbus, the VW microbuses. Partly because they were cheaper, partly because, do you remember they had like a little, just bigger than a lawnmower engine? And they were, I think, only 4 cylinders, and they were air cooled. But again, when you're raising 4 hungry boys and you're trying to transport them, you want something cheap. And plus, I think my dad just liked the looks of it. So here's one that we had done up for a parade. You can see this is what they call the 21 window van. And again, if you have one of these today, even if it's tired, they are worth big money. A friend of mine who's also a car, again, I'm not a car fanatic because I don't work on them myself, but he loves old cars, and he loves this story of the Studebaker. But he's always sending me Facebook connectors about, you know, a 1965 a 21 window van went for $80,000. So, oh, it's just been restored, $100,000. So if you've got a 21 window van in your basement, get it out. You can get some money. So that was the window van we rode in, and then and that was a used car, but we liked it. Then my dad bought a '63 one that was brand new, and we thought we were living because it's brand new. Now I have to introduce you to the Goodwin boys, because this was the other thing about my parents. Every November they got us out to take our Christmas picture. You remember the days when people would send? So there's my mom, and I love she's wearing the vinyl boots over her shoes. There's my dad with his businessman's hat, and there's the 4 Goodwin boys. Oh, that's our dog Chris, by the way. He was with us in almost all the pictures because he lived for like 15, 16 years. And there we are in my mom always bought clothes so it would look alike. There's our London fog raincoats because she always wanted us looking good. And then we had our red Greek policeman's hats on because my cousins had gone to Greece for the year because my uncle was a college professor and he was doing a sabbatical / teaching year at the University of Athens. And so they sent, and their kids were our cousins that we used to love to go visit down in Connecticut. They sent us those policeman's caps. So I just love the red and the white and the bus. Oh, what a nice middle-class American
Do
thing.
you remember the camper version, the pop-up roof?
No,
Aftermarket company?
but well, my dad always wanted to get one. We never did. All right, which one do you?
Are you the older one? No?
Let me see. In most of the pictures, we're in age order.
Oh.
Let me make sure I get it right. There's Lynn, number 1. There's me, number 2.
Oh, you're the...
I'm number 2. I always try harder. There's Kim, number 3, and Dana the baby, number 4. So, because I do another program that I call Growing Up Grubby, because that's what our cousins nicknamed us, the Grubbies, the Goodwin Grubbies. So, but again, we've got these lovely old Christmas pictures each year getting older. But anyway, so we had this VW microbus, and as you mentioned, a lot of people got camper versions of them or rigged their own camper. And my dad, because again, my dad couldn't afford to take us to a motel. That would cost a fortune, for, 4 boys. So he always wanted to plan to take us in the bus. So he was rigging it and tricking it out a little. And in the back, because remember the engines in those cars were in the back, right? Everybody remembers that. There's a popular thing on Facebook that shows a guy lifting the hood of a Beetle, and there's steam coming out of the hood of the Beetle, thinking it's coming out of the radiator, but it always says, "What's wrong with this picture?" There's no steam coming out of a radiator of a Beetle because it's in the back and it was air cooled, right? Okay. So in the back was this. There was a lift gate, and then there was this shelf because the engine was under that.
It was a flat 4-cylinder.
Yeah, but we always just said it sounded like a lawnmower. Because and again, as we got a little older and would take 4 or 5 of our friends, I still remember my mom saying, "I hope it gets up the hill."
Like mountains or hills.
And the heater in that thing was, that's why I think she always had us bring a friend, because that, there'd be 8 young bodies putting out the heat. The heater in this thing couldn't put out, more than 2 degrees of heat a month, I guess. So my dad then rigged up this thing using a sheet of plywood with a hinge that was attached to the front of that shelf in the cab of the car, and it would fold down. And his plan was to make that into a bunk for him and my mom, and we would sleep on the floor. Because again, my dad always came up with these mattresses. So usually we were supposed to put the wooden piece of wood up. It was a piece of plywood, and then put the seats in, and you had to screw them in with little bolts. And what a pain that was, because if the dirt got in the holes, you had to be going like this to blow the dirt out of the holes before you could put the seats in. So sometimes we would just fold down the piece of plywood, and we would sit 2 or 3 boys on the plywood and 1 or 2 boys on the floor, and my folks would drive. So my mom would often take my dad to work in the morning, because except for when my dad had the Studebaker out going, we only had that one car, the VW bus. And one time, we were going somewhere, and my mom said, "I need somebody to come with me. We were going to get some groceries, and she needed 1 boy." So I said, "Well, I'll go." So my 3 brothers are staying at home, and I'm sitting in the back, because I like sitting in the back, and I'm sitting on the piece of plywood. Now, I have to tell you, it's unfinished plywood that's been gone up and down 100 times, and been 4 boys bounced on it 1,000,000 times. So we're driving along, and my mom's driving, and I'm sitting on this side of the bus, and she whips around a corner, and I slid this way on a, yes, you got it.
Oh,
On an unfinished piece of plywood, and all of a sudden I'm feeling, ow, 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 ow. Oh, right along here. Not here, and thankfully not up here, but right along, yeah, exactly, I know. And I must have picked up, I don't know, a bunch of splinters. So I go, Mom, we gotta go home. And so we canceled the grocery trip. She drove me home and I'm saying, Mom, and I had to take my pants down. And she goes, oh my God. And when she, oh my goodness gracious. So when she said that, I'm going, oh, what's better? So she says, all right, go lie down on the couch, take your pants down. And she gets her tweezers out. And she's starting to pull out, yeah, right, 100 splinters. I don't know how many there were. And she's going, oh, I'll never be able to get this done. Oh dear. So she calls my grandmother, who lived like about a mile from our house, and said, Vera, get Grandpa's photography light ready and get your tweezers. Why? I'll be there in 5 minutes. So I had to put my pants on and go sit down. This time I sat up front on the cushion seat, right on the edge. We drove down to my grandmother's. We walk into her sitting room, combination knitting or her sewing room, and she had this big chaise lounge thing. And my mom said, lie down there on your stomach, pants down. My grandmother's going, what's going on? So I lie down and my grandmother takes the photo light, puts it on there, and she goes, oh my goodness, same kind of thing. So she and my mom are there tweezing. My grandmother goes, this is going to take all night. So she gets on the phone. Hazel, Sabina, bring a pair of tweezers and come up to my house. You see the two ladies. So pretty soon there's me with no pants on, and my grandmother, Mrs. Proctor, and Miss Flint, an old friend of the family, and my mom working over this. That's what I felt. I was so embarrassed too. But finally, they got them all out. But then my mom couldn't get the last one out. So we had to go to the doctor's, and he had to cut it out, and it was like this long. And I've got it somewhere in my basement in an old scrapbook, because I did save it, because nobody will believe me. But I still haven't a chance to find that splinter. So that's what I always say to people. If you're going to make seats out of plywood, make sure you put rubber or foam on it or something. So that's the fun story of the bus. And again, after my parents separated, my mom took the bus, but she would always let me sit up front with her because to make sure that I was safe. Yeah.
You don't want to go through that again?
Me neither. All right. Oh, we're still good on time, right? Still got room on the videotape there? Yeah, okay. All right. Well, as I mentioned, my dad, there's another picture of the bus. I'll pass that around in a minute. My dad kept this license plate. And then he got his second dream car in the late 60s. And this was after my parents had separated. So my mom had the bus, and my dad bought a 1940 Packard Super 8 touring car. Ooh. So you please pass that on. But again, make sure you take a minute to look at the license plate, because he's got the good 41 plate on it. Because it was, shall I say, it was a well broken in car. It was kind of tired. Now Packard certainly had a bigger, better reputation than Studebaker, but this was also, I want to say he got it like 69 or 70, so it was an older car, but still, for traveling with boys, he loved it. And here's another great picture of it. We went to a car show, and everybody said, ooh, ah. But again, it had been unrestored, because that's the other thing about cars today. If you go on some of those websites, they have values for almost every car out there. Some parts car, totally unrestored, semi-restored, and then the people who spend $50 to $80 to $100,000 to restore a car and makes it worth like $200,000. So this car was totally unrestored. It had been the VIP car for Massachusetts General Hospital, and somehow my dad found a connection. So it's a big touring car. It had a comorant on the front. That was always a cool thing, the big hood ornament. And it had running boards, and it had a big front seat. You could put 3 people in the front seat easy. In the way back, it had a big, sort of like a rounded couch. You could put 3, squeeze 4 if you had to. And then between the back of the front seat and the feet of the guys in the back seat were folding jump seats. I don't know if anybody remembers those.
Nice car.
Oh, it was a wonderful car, except for it was kind of tired. Because sometimes we'd be driving along, like one time in a parade it got vapor lock.
oh, yeah.
That's that, that if your car gets a little overheating, it vapor locks, and there's nothing you can do except to roll it to the side and let it cool.
The cool rag around the fuel line, supposedly.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. My dad just said, just sit tight. Now, my dad always carried snacks in the car for us, I think maybe for things like this. But I love that car because then, one year my dad said, let's do the Christmas picture in front of the Packard.
Oh, nice. Is the whole family?
That's everybody except for my mom, because she was taking the picture, I think, by then.
Oh, cool.
So there you go. Let me see if we're in order again. So.
Are you the second one?
Oh, yes, there I am. Lynn number 1, me number 2,
Okay.
3. Dana's up on the running board, so that's why he looks tall. And there's my dad. Yeah.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
a nice picture.
Oh,
Very nice picture.
all right.
Nice to look back.
Oh, yes. But the funny story about the Packard was that was our main car, particularly in the fall and in the winter when the Studebaker had been put away for the winter. And so one time, my dad, we were going over to visit friends who had rented a cottage on Lake Menominee up in Ringe, New Hampshire. And so because my dad was taking a bunch of us, and he didn't want to use the Studebaker to go that far, he said, let's go in the Packard. So we went in the Packard, and we were hanging out with their kids. They had three kids, 2 boys and a girl. And we're hanging out with them, we're messing around, and they were living on a lake. So my younger brother Dana loved fishing. So he caught 2 big beautiful hornpout and put it in a bucket, and he said, I want to take this home. And so after the evening was over, and my dad said, you're not going to put a bucket in the car, sloshing around. What can we do? Well, on the back of the Packard is a luggage rack. The Packard trunk, ironically, was very small for such a big car, but it had this folding down luggage rack, that had little pins that held it up, but then you pull the pins and it would fall down. You could put like a giant steamer trunk on there and then tie it on, and you could carry, lots of stuff. And so my dad said, well, our friends gave him a bag, the plastic bag that bread used to come in, still comes in, and we poured the fish, 2 big beautiful hornpout, into the bag, tied it, and then he tied it to the luggage rack. And so my dad said, all right, that'll be okay, because if the bag breaks, it'll just leak all over the street, not all over the inside of his beautiful Packard. So we're driving home, and all of a sudden he hits a bump, and you hear a thump, and we looked out the back window. The luggage rack had fallen down. But my brother said, I can still see the bag. It's fine. So we're driving along, and we get home, and my brother gets out. I'm going to clean those fish tonight, and then put them in the fridge. And he takes it. It had fallen right in front of the exhaust pipe. And so for the whole way home, it had been heating the bag. So there were 2 dead, parboiled hornpout. I don't think we ever had those, but I always think, so whenever I see or hear about a Packard, I think, ooh, you can cook fish on the back of a Packard. All right. Well, it comes to everybody in their lifetime that they get their first car. Whoop, there it is. And my first car, I had, full disclosure, it was my grandmother's old station wagon that she gave me a deal on. But you can see that again, because my dad let me register it using his plate to keep it. It was a 1963 Oldsmobile station wagon, because my grandmother loved station wagons. I mean, we love station wagons. And and I love this car because I had grown up in it with my grandmother. It was an automatic transmission. It was decent on gas. It was a small V8, but it had a new kind of transmission that had issues. So if you ever go for a 62 or 3 Oldsmobile, be careful that transmissions had issues. And it was so bad that, when I would go in to fill it up with gas, rather than check the oil, and remember in the old days when they'd come to the window and say, check your oil, check your, all that? I would have to say, please check my transmission fluid, because this transmission just always was drinking it, dripping it, whatever. And remember, the General Motors transmission fluid at that time was like a bright red, okay? And so one time I was I worked at this summer camp that I went to with my brother and 3 or 4 or 5 kitchen boys and CITs, counselors in training. And we had packed this wagon full of kids, and we went to town for a night out, and we're driving in, and I go, all right, everybody give me $1 for the gas, because we had to chip in. And then my brother said, you better check the transmission fluid. And I said, oh yeah. So when the attendant came, I said, give me $6 or $7 worth of gas, and do you have any transmission fluid for an old Oldsmobile? And my brother said, without missing a beat, you mean an old Slowsmobile? Because that's how fast it went, because it didn't have a great transmission. So, and again, remember Oldsmobiles? Did anybody have an Oldsmobile in their past? Yep. Great car, great car. And again, my grandfather had some wonderful, the 98s and the 88s. But that's another company that has gone the way of all things, right? So whenever we think of this old station wagon, my brother says, oh yeah, remember the old Slowsmobile. Yeah. So that's my first car, and that's my fun car. I had that car for about a year, and then the transmission just literally, like a pile of dry spaghetti just went. And I remember we got it towed to the garage where my dad had worked on all the car. And the guy said, "Oh yeah, we could probably fix it for about $1,000." And I'm going, "Probably it's worth 20." So that car went to the junkyard. So that's my first car story. Anybody else have a first car story, or even just remember their first car that maybe you learned to drive on? Go ahead.
I bought my first brand new car, 1970 Volkswagen bus.
Okay.
And we decided to go to New York. Up the border there, we got all the falls and everything.
Oh sure, Niagara.
Right.
Yeah.
And we took the Cherry Valley Highway. Well, coming home, everybody was passing us, even the milk wagons, because the engine didn't have any power. There was no heat. Well, every day when I'd go to work, going to Brockton, I'd have to stop at Christo's over here on the east side, scrape the windshield so I could see through it. And then whenever my kids or my daughter went with us in it, going downtown in Whitman, as soon as we got to the top of the hill where the fire station is, coming down, my daughter would sit down below the seat because she didn't want any of her school friends to see her riding in the boat. Too embarrassing.
All right, a 70 you said Volkswagen?
1970, brand new one.
Beautiful. What color was it too?
It was red with the white top.
Yep. Remember a lot of them were two-tone.
I
Yeah.
had it for so long that I had to replace some of the flooring with metal
Sheets.
because it all rotted out.
Yeah.
You couldn't kill the dog on it.
Well, that.
There was no power to it.
Well, my Oldsmobile was a two-tone car when my grandmother bought it. A white roof you can see and a copper bottom. By the time I got it, it was a tritone, white, copper tone, and rust. Yeah.
And I think I paid $2,800 for it, brand new.
Oh boy, isn't that amazing?
But
Yeah.
this was 1970.
Yeah, that was a few years back.
Yeah.
My
Great.
first one was in '66. It was a '57 Chevy, 10-year-old Chevy. Paid $150 for it. It was a Bel Air, three-speed on the column,
Yeah.
free. 265 V8, very small V8.
Yep.
And had that for a couple of years.
Yeah, but talk about the Bel Airs and Nomads are very big on the
Yeah.
are very big on the collector market now.
Nomad was the wagon, two-door wagon.
That's right. Yeah, I remember first seeing that. Oh, what a cool wagon! Because I like station wagons too. Yeah. Saw another hand back there. And somebody want to say?
My first car was a 57 Chevy wagon, full-dress wagon, and I was paying for my father's buying a car and let me drive it. So I figured I'd go out and find a car, and down the street I saw this old wagon sitting in the yard, and I went over and I asked him, "Well, you want to sell it?" Or he says, "Well, if you think you can get it out of here, take it." And so I started working on it. I couldn't shift it. So I went down and I bought a shifter at the auto parts place and put a floor shifter in it. And it was in the winter time. And the plate I got for it ended in 28, P28. And 28 days later, it blew up on me. I used to go down the street in the wintertime in the snow, and I'd have to put a piece of cardboard behind my head because all the rear around the doors and the windows and the wheels were all rotted away.
So it let the snow in. Yeah.
You go around the corner and the back end would slide to one side.
Yeah, that's living though. Everybody wants heated seats today. I can't buy a new car without getting heated seats for my wife. Don't tell her I said that. Oh, she doesn't watch this program, I don't think. Anybody else want to share theirs? Or? Oh, go ahead, there's a gentleman in the back.
Just a little reputation I have developed. My first car was a Dodge 8-passenger van. And it had a slant 6.
Yep.
I killed the slant 6, which was almost an impossible thing to do.
Right, because my grandmother later had a 72 Dodge Dart with a slant 6. Those slant 6 ran forever and ever and ever, yeah.
Best engine ever
It
made.
developed a leak between the coolant and the oil.
Yeah.
So the oil just turned into sludge.
Yeah, yeah, oh boy, yeah, yep, yeah, yep.
I've had indirect association with those Volkswagen buses, but there was a guy in Woonsocket named Shirk who said the reason you couldn't get heat out of them is they didn't burn any gasoline. And he would buy kits from J.C. Whitney in Chicago
Yep.
and add, I don't know, 10 or 15 horsepower to that Porsche engine that was in there, that
Yeah, that little engine, yeah.
engine.
Yeah,
And then they would make a little heat. And it was worth putting in the bigger engine just to get some.
some heat, yeah.
So they were too thrifty.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything mechanically wrong.
No, it's just that's the way they, yeah, oh yeah.
That's how it was.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
brother solved the problem. He bought a van, house van from Volkswagen. And he put in a Wolf gas propane furnace in the van.
Wow.
With a tank in the back, horizontal, and a smokestack out the roof. And
I don't know, that sounds almost as safe as no seatbelts.
his, let me see. Yeah, that's all accurate.
Yeah.
And he was living over near Albany in Sand Lake,
Yeah, oh, and they get cold weather up there too, yeah.
and
Yeah.
he needed the heat.
Yeah, of course, of course. Well, like I say, my dad had 4 boys to put some heat out, but then whenever we'd take that car in the winter, we'd always have a blanket or 2 in the back, yeah, yeah. Anybody else want, there, yeah,
My second car was a 57 Chevy convertible, and the engine had blow-by. It was all worn out. The guy had bought it directly from GM. He worked for GM at the time.
yeah,
He bought it when it came out, and I got it home, and a friend had a car that I took his engine and put it in there, and I had it for many years.
oh, good, so,
And I
had that evened out with the other one
sold
then?
it
Yeah,
to a boy that was, when we were married, we wanted to have one dependable car.
yeah, yeah,
That's a good
So I sold it to a guy that went over to Vietnam, boy that went over to Vietnam, and he died over there. But his father kept the car for, last time I saw it was about 6 years ago.
oh, cool,
And it was still in the same shape and still looked beautiful.
beautiful, good. And your story, go ahead.
Well, I didn't have to ride in the trunk. My dad had a truck, and there were 6 of us, so you know where we rode.
In the back of the bed there, yeah.
Yes, he had a old car seat that he kept in the garden shed, and he put it in there. And I didn't get splinters, but one day we're about halfway from Greenfield to Northampton, and there was a little mouse inside my skirt that had been living
In the
inside.
sea, oh, what a good story, yeah.
And my father used to...
We had to stop
sorry.
on the way down to get the mouse out.
Oh, right, yeah,
My father and one of the Studebaker.
right. This young lady brought in a picture of
The hawk.
an old Hawk Studebaker,
He had a
yeah.
toolbox.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
He was going to buy an Avanti and he passed away.
Yep. A lot of people love the Studebakers because they were so well made, yeah. All right. Oh, good. Did anybody who didn't get a chance want to tell a
I
story?
got a 67 Volkswagen, brand new,
The bus or the bug?
the Bug.
Yeah.
And I said to the salesman, I don't know how to drive a shift. Oh, no problem. He wasn't gonna lose a commission.
So did he teach you?
He did teach me. I went around the park, we went out here, there, and everywhere. And at the same time, my husband that I didn't know was gonna be my husband bought a 67 Firebird convertible. 14 years later, we were still driving the Volkswagen. And I don't know, maybe 5 years later, the Firebird crapped. It really was
All right.
no good.
And my first car was, I was 16, got my license, and it was, I bought a used 56 Volkswagen Beetle.
Wow.
You know, they had all those small windows. And
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
like that.
Yeah, those are the
And,
early ones, yeah.
Probably two good stories is in winter they're terrible. We're already talking about the heat is really the non-existent in those cars.
Yeah, yeah.
So in the winter, there was two things. Is one, I had to have an ice scraper for scraping the ice off the inside of the windshield. And if I was taking somebody to school, they would do the passengers.
Yeah, yeah, make them work, yeah.
And then the other thing is those were 6-cylinder. So if moisture or water got up inside the starter, which had kind of a band that clips over the end where all the contacts are,
Yep.
water got in there, it fries up. So before, in the morning, I would get up, in the winter, get up early to go out to see if it would start. And if it wouldn't even, you just hear the click, you know it was frozen. So I'd have to take that out, crawl out underneath the car, take that out, bring it in, hope Mom didn't wake up, and Dad would allow me to put it in the oven to warm it up, to thaw it out, and then put it back in the car, and then off to school.
Boy, that's a great story. I'm gonna, yeah.
You're a history person too, right?
Right, a little bit, yeah.
And Studebaker supplied almost all the trucks to the Russians during World War II.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And some people have suggested that that's one of the reasons why Packard and Studebaker didn't recover as quickly after the war, particularly Packard, because they put a lot of the big Packard motors in the PT boats.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that because though I think Studebaker was one of the early cars after the war to get up into new production, because that was the interesting thing. A lot of the first post-war cars were 42s with just a little extra new chrome on it, you know, and then they started to develop. Yeah. Oh, good. We're gonna. I still got a few more stories. Can we keep going? All right. If anybody has to go, well, let's go back to the Studebaker. Actually, I got one more car. This is a 1967 Buick Skylark convertible.
Oh, I had a Buick Skylark.
There you go. That was
I had a Buick Skylark. It was beautiful. It was yellow.
Oh, was it the convertible?
No, it
Oh.
wasn't. It was a hardtop. My
Yeah.
father, it was a used car,
Yeah.
and my father fixed it up because he was in the body shop business.
Beautiful.
And he sold cars too.
Yeah, yeah.
So I could have any car I wanted.
Sweet. So here's a picture of us
So funny.
in the 70s. My dad had this 67 Buick convertible that he liked because he got it used. He got it from a friend of his. We used to always call him, yeah, that's Dad's friend, because he would often sell him some of these cars that he was trying to get rid of, and my dad would say, oh, give it a try. But it was our first convertible we ever had, and I was using it in college. And I was kind of shy. Now that I know that doesn't come out because I love to talk in groups and so forth, and I love to tell stories. But when I was in college, I was very shy. My older brother Lynn, he had the way with the ladies, you know. My younger brother Kim, he had a steady girlfriend, and so I was very shy. So, but I was singing in a show called Brigadoon. Anybody remember that? And because I was in the concert choir at the college, and they said that they would give a percentage of the money raised for the show to the concert choir, so that'd be great. So there was this beautiful young lady with long blonde hair and just a perfect visage, and she sang about two people in front of me in the chorus line. I was sitting in the back, and I'm going, oh, I want to meet this girl, but how could I talk to such a beautiful young lady? I was a choir boy. I was very nervous. So there was on the Friday night, it was a weekend show, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. On the Friday night, there was a cast party in a triple-decker in Fitchburg. I went to Fitchburg State College. And I was up on this third floor enjoying the cast party, talking to people. And so I said, I got to get going. So I go out, and then I noticed the blonde young woman is right, like 5 steps behind me. So she's thanking the host for it. So I'm walking down the stairs going, and I'm trying to walk slow. So what can I say to her? You know, and I was so nervous. And so I get to the bottom of the steps, the bottom floor, and I hold the door for her because I was always taught by my dad to be a gentleman. And she goes, thank you. And I go, you're welcome. And we walk out, and we had the choicest parking spots in front of this house. And I had the 67 Buick Skylark convertible. Again, it was my dad's car, but he let me use it. And she had a beautiful 1969 Plymouth Fury 3 convertible. And remember how those cars were giant. I mean, you could put 6 adults in it easy. The hood end, you could like play a football game on the hood end, and you could, put a double bed on the back end. But she's got a convertible. So I'm getting in my car all the while. I'm going, what can I say to her? What can I say? I'm going, oh, I see you have a convertible. And she goes, why, yes, I see you have a convertible. We were on safe ground because I could talk cars. And so, yeah, it's not my car, but it's my dad's, but he lets me drive it. It's a Buick, 67. And she goes, well, my dad just bought me this car. I don't know much about them at all. I said, oh, well, let me. And so I started, oh, it's a good.
He went on and on.
And thank God we've been married 45 years. So I always say to young men, get the kind of car, the same kind of car as the young woman that you're interested in. I don't know if you can plan that today because they don't make as many convertibles. But so whenever my wife and I see old mid-60s convertibles, we look at each other like that. Yeah. So.
That's funny.
All right.
We used to be able to identify every year the car came out, and for the next 20 years you knew that was a 47 or a 52. You can't do that anymore.
Oh no! Some cars are so designed in the, sometimes it's even hard to see the badging on them. But I mean, I love it when, because I really feel strong about. Oh, I can say that's a 40s, 50s, into the 60s, and some of the 70s. But like one of my brothers, he's a real whiz at it. Yeah. So, but today. There's so many of the cars are so look alike. Yeah.
They look alike.
Yeah. Well, good. We have a few more minutes then. So, like I say, my dad had that Studebaker, the beautiful green car, till the 1990s, and then he sold it. And I was, and looking back or thinking back, I thought, why didn't he say to one of us, "Do you want to buy it?" But of course, I had 2 little boys. Actually, by then they were in high school, and I'm thinking, I can't afford that car. My other brother, he had 2 kids. He couldn't afford that car. My other brother, he lived way out in New York. He could probably afford it, but, So my dad sold it. And fortunately, he sold it to a guy in the Central Massachusetts Antique Car Club. So, it wasn't just because the thing that always made him almost cry, he did get it painted once at a local paint shop, and the guy did a great job. But the guy said to my dad, love your Studebaker, Bill. It's a wonderful car. If you ever want to sell it, I got about 5 guys who would pay you top dollar for that because they want to chop it and make it into a hot rod. And my dad almost had a heart attack. So thankfully, my dad never did that. So as I say, my dad sold it in the 90s, and we always told the stories about it. Yeah, I remember riding in the back of the Studebaker. Oh, yeah, that was, and as car seats for kids have gotten bigger and bigger. Remember we used to ride in that thing, no seatbelts? Yeah. But anyway, about 7 years ago, my brother, who works for Sony, he puts TV studios in places, and he was setting up a TV studio in South Bend, Indiana, and that's where they made Studebakers, at the South Bend, Indiana big plant. Today, if you go to South Bend, Indiana, and that's on my to-do list, the old factory is now the Studebaker Museum. And so my brother was there with his colleague who was helping him install a TV studio in whatever place it was. And my brother said, let's go to the museum, because my dad loved Studebakers and we grew up on Studebakers. So they went and they walked in, and if you look at the front of the Studebaker, you can see that it has 2 tones. It was green, light green, and then the red. And my brother walked in and he said, oh, and he saw at the museum they have a blue one with a dark blue and a light blue stripe. And my brother goes to his buddy, my dad had that same model or same vintage, only it was green and light green. And the guy said, yeah, Dana, you're full of baloney, telling a story, because Goodwin boys are known for telling a story. And my brother said, no, he did. So he dug out some pictures and sent them to his buddy and said, okay, I believe you. But then my brother Dana got onto a quest to try to find the car. Now, remember, he works for Sony. He gets lots of money, corporate America. He also has no children. He has no wife, so he has lots of disposable income. And he's a whiz at the interweb, on the internet, So he goes on the internet and he starts to try to track it down. Talking to the leadership of the Antique Car Club, he said, oh yeah, I remember your dad had that, and he sold it to whoever this, and he lives in Natick or something like that. So my brother calls him, and he goes, oh yeah, I had that car, that was a nice car, your dad had it nicely painted, but then I sold it, 10 years after I bought it. And so my brother was finally able to track it to Hershey, Pennsylvania. Now, if you ever get a chance to go to Hershey, I think it's in August, they have like one of the world's largest antique and other car parts, and it's like 10 football fields. We went once as teenagers, and just was amazing looking at all the parts. Okay, so he said, yeah, I sold it to a guy at Hershey last year. He's some guy up in Canada. So finally my brother tracks it down. It's to a guy outside of Toronto who runs a chrome shop, and he takes old cars, restores them, but then gives them brand new deluxe chrome. And so my brother calls him and said, we're trying to track down a 1941 Studebaker. And the guy says, because remember in those days they didn't have the VIN numbers. They had, like we have the, the little slot in the front window there where you can see. They would have a serial number, but often the serial number was on the door jamb or in the engine where they would get worn. Okay, so sometimes I can't quite read the serial number on an older car. So he says, I think it could be the car you're looking for. So my brother said, well, would you be interested in selling it? We're thinking, if this guy restores cars. And he said, well, and he was an older gentleman too. He said, yeah, well, my wife says I can't have as many cars on the property anymore. And he had 3 guys working with him, one who had just passed away and one guy had gone to start his own shop. So he said, well, if you want the car and if we can agree on the price, yeah, I'll sell it to you. So my brothers and I would get in my brother has a Chrysler Pacifica, nice car, leather seats, great for a long road trip. Anybody have a Chrysler Pacifica? Okay. So we drive up there, we see the guy the next morning, and he had a 5-bay garage. And we pull into the yard, and his wife comes to the door and says, are you guys coming here to buy the car? And we go, we hope so. And he goes, good, he's right, because you could tell she didn't want him to have so many cars. So we walk around behind, there's this 5-bay garage, and he's got the middle one open, and we walk in, and that's what we find. A 1941 Studebaker. You can pass around. And that's the 4 boys. Ooh, we're out of order. I'm sorry. 1, 2, I still have the glasses. 3, 4. All right. So we go in, and there in the center bay is this beautiful green Studebaker. He said, yeah, I even waxed it up for you to look at. And then over on the left, he had like a 1920s Ford pickup. On the other side, he had, I think it was a Packard, and then he had 2 other cars that were totally broken down. I can't remember what they are. He said, because he does the chrome work first, then he does the paint job, whatever. So he's re-chromed this. And he goes, yeah, I think it's your car, because when I was working the interior, the glove boxes then were just cardboard boxes, literally thumbtacked to the inside of the dash. He said, I was trying to repair the glove box, and sort of slipped down behind it was some insurance from a Fitchburg, Massachusetts insurance broker with a Mrs. Nan Goodwin. And that's my mom. So then we could finally find the serial number. It was the same serial number. So of course we now know, and the 4 of us are just going, So my other brother says, can we check one more thing? And I go, yeah, the hubcaps. Now you got to remember that my mom had 4 boys who were always losing stuff. So whenever we got something new, whether it was a new toy or new clothes, my mom would take out a black magic marker and write our name on it. Todd, Lynn, or if it was something that might get lost at school, Kim Goodwin, So when my dad got this car, he had my mom paint this on each one of the hubcaps. Please phone 617, our number, if lost, B. Goodwin, that's my dad, Bill Goodwin, Fitchburg, because again, by the mid-1960s, with Studebaker out of business, if you lost the hubcap, you'd have to go to a hubcap shop and hope you can find one. All right? So we got this off, and I love it how my mom had bought a jar of the red paint that matches the red paint of the Studebaker logo, and you can see it on the front of the Studebaker. And so we eventually took off all 4, and all 4 of them have this little message on it. And then, God bless my brother. This is my brother Dana. He's so generous. So he bought the car. He's the one who bought it, and he had it shipped back to. He lives in southern New Hampshire, which is just half an hour north of Fitchburg, where the rest of us live. And he had the car shipped back there, polished up beautifully. He's had to do some work on some of the springs because they need some work. And he takes it out again. He keeps it garaged all the time, and he because he lives in New Hampshire, he was able to get the good 41 New Hampshire plate on this car. That again, occasionally he drives it because you know a lot of ice cream places now do cruise nights, and they often say to people with old cars, come and sit. If you'll park your car in our parking lot, you know we'll give you a free ice cream if you'll just sit there for the night. So a lot of people do this, men and women and families, and so my brother and I, because then COVID put a bump in all that. So my brother and I keep planning to do that. So my brother, using the power of the internet, he found a hubcap shop that would, I'm not sure if they're originals or if he was able to get them reproduced. He took off the hubcaps and gave one to each of us. So we each have one. And he still has beautiful, shiny Studebaker hubcaps on. So he's such a dear. And so, oh yeah, so here you can see us in the guy's shop. So here we go. Oh, there it is. So I like to just pass it. Here it is, back in the family again. The Goodwin boys, back in the family. And then, after he got this, that is, just as he's buying it from the guy. So here he's got it now in, as I say, southern New Hampshire. And one day we had it in Fitchburg because my other brother helps him with the maintenance. My brother, he's much more of a mechanical guy. But he said, Todd, take it for a spin, and you can see the New Hampshire Good 41 current license plate.
That plate went everywhere.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Boy, that's a traveling plate.
Well, like I say, about probably 12 or 13 years ago now, I bought that. I mean, I got it from the registry. I didn't, but when you request what they call them vanity plates or privilege plates, when you request one, you have to explain, because sometimes some people have used kind of rude remarks up on their plate, so the registry doesn't want plates that might be rude, and so I wrote them and said, I'd like to apply for Good 41 if nobody has it. Nobody did, because for many years my dad had it back in the 60s, 70s, 90s, and I'd love to put it on. And as a storyteller, I was just launching my website. Oh, did I tell you about my website?
Yes. That's cute.
So that's my domain name is good41.com. And again, please, if you can hit it, that'd be great. You can see some of the other programs I do. So I got from the registry this plate about 10, 11 years ago, and it's now on I had it on a couple of different cars. It's now on my 2013 Hyundai Elantra. But I didn't bring it today so I could show it to you because that car's got 195,000 miles on it. And I recommend Elantras, Hyundais, if you like, dependable cars. My wife and I just bought that blue one right out there. We just bought a new one in November. It's one of those hybrids, so I'm dying to get to know this car. So that's so we still have the license plate in Massachusetts.
That plate reproduction or that the original?
This is the original plate.
So clean.
Yep, because remember in those days, you got a new plate every year, or maybe every other year.
Yeah.
So, and my dad, again, that car, that plate may not have ever gone out in the winter, because yeah,
That's true. Yeah, his wife's in good shape.
right. And so we found it in his stuff, and he kept it really well. So it's been my little display. Oh boy, we've gone overtime. I'm sorry. I hope I'm not holding anybody up. Well, thank you for listening. Whenever we finish a program, we have to sing a song. Unless there's any other questions that people had or wanted to share about cars. Just to me, the fun thing about cars is how cars have given so many of us the freedom for road trips with our family, to go visit your cousin somewhere. There's a whole set of stories I love when we would go down the Wilbur Cross Parkway in the VW bus, not a bug. My mom had a bug later, ironically, to go visit my cousins in Connecticut. And the bus did pretty well on those old parkways that were developed to get cars out of the city, because the speed limit on those babies were like 50 miles an hour. And so, but of course, if you go 50 miles an hour on one of those today, people are going to blow by. So I just, as a history teacher, I just think about how about 125 years, no, maybe 110 years ago, just before World War I, how Henry Ford and the other early automakers were just starting to mass produce cars, so that by the late 20s, again, not everybody had a car. I don't want to say that everybody had a car, but it certainly was changing America. So that,
For sure.
yeah, and again, for those of us who grew up post-World War II, the cars changed America. Remember, that's when they built the interstate highway system.
Yes.
Beginning in with President Eisenhower in the 1950s. So just everybody I bump into of my generation, of our generation, has some fun old car stories. So that's the program. Here's our song. Can we sing one last song? Here we go. This is a song, not very long. The words aren't fresh, the tune isn't new. It's just a song, not very long, to say I'm glad that I met you. And thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing your stories. Thank you. You bet. And I'll be here for 5-10 minutes if anybody wants to ask a question or something else. All right. Thanks for coming, and keep up the good work. And thanks for the gentleman from the local access television who are putting us on the big screen. There we go. All right. Let's give him a big hand. There we go. All right.